The fluorescent lights hummed their midnight symphony as Margaret Chen slumped in her executive chair, pretending to be asleep. At 53, the CEO of TechVision Industries had mastered the art of corporate warfare, hostile takeovers, and billion-dollar negotiations. But tonight, she was playing a different game, testing the integrity of the one employee she'd never truly noticed, the night janitor, ***. Her company was hemorrhaging money. 3 key clients had walked. Her board wanted her out. And someone, she was certain, was leaking proprietary information to their biggest competitor. Margaret had spent 6 months investigating her executive team, her assistants, even her own secretary. Now, in a moment of desperate paranoia, she'd decided to test the cleaning staff. It seemed absurd, but she'd left confidential documents deliberately scattered across her desk, her laptop open to sensitive emails, and her purse, containing $2,000 in cash, sitting exposed on the credenza. The office door creaked open at exactly 11:47 p.m. Through barely opened eyelids, Margaret watched a figure enter. Carlos Mendoza pushed his cleaning cart slowly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the silence. He was probably in his 60s, she guessed, though she'd never actually looked at him properly before. Just another invisible worker in a building full of people she paid but didn't know. Margaret held her breath, waiting. Would he rifle through the papers? Photograph the laptop screen? Pocket the cash? Carlos did none of these things. Instead, he noticed her slumped position and hesitated. She could feel his concern from across the room. He approached quietly, and Margaret prepared herself for the moment of truth. This was it. This was where she'd discover what kind of man he really was. "Ma'am?" His voice was soft, accented, genuinely worried. "Ms. Chen?" She didn't respond, maintaining her facade of sleep. Carlos stood there for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He walked to the corner of her office, retrieved a spare blanket she kept on her leather couch for late nights, and gently draped it over her shoulders. The tenderness of the gesture caught her off guard. Through her lashes, she watched him adjust it carefully, making sure she was covered. Then he turned to her desk. Margaret's heart raced. Here it comes, she thought bitterly. The disappointment. The betrayal. But Carlos didn't touch the documents. Instead, he noticed her laptop screen was still on, glowing with those sensitive emails. He moved around the desk carefully, never looking at the screen's content, and with 2 fingers, as if afraid to invade her privacy, he gently closed the laptop. Then he took her purse from the exposed credenza and placed it inside her desk drawer, closing it softly. Margaret's throat tightened. For the next hour, she watched through slitted eyes as Carlos cleaned her office with meticulous care. He emptied her trash, wiped down surfaces, vacuumed so quietly she barely heard it. And then something happened that would change everything. Carlos paused at her desk, looking at the scattered documents. But he wasn't reading them. He was looking at a sticky note she'd written to herself in frustration earlier that evening. "Riverside Project, where is the leak?" She watched his weathered face change. Recognition flickered in his eyes, then something else, determination. He pulled out his own phone, took a photo not of the confidential documents, but of that single sticky note, and then continued cleaning. What was he doing? After Carlos left, Margaret sat up, her mind spinning. She'd gotten her answer about his integrity, the man was clearly honest, but that photo bothered her. She couldn't sleep. At 6 a.m., when Carlos would be finishing his shift, she found herself walking down to the janitorial office in the basement, a place she'd never visited in 15 years as CEO. The door was ajar. Inside, she heard Carlos on the phone, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Her college Spanish was rusty, but she caught enough words to stop her cold. "Riverside, information, police, nephew." Margaret pushed open the door. Carlos spun around, phone still in hand, his eyes wide with surprise and, was that guilt? "Ms. Chen." I can explain. Explain what? Her voice was sharp, CEO mode activated. Explain why you photographed my private notes. Why you're talking about my company's confidential projects. Carlos's face crumpled, and in that moment, he looked every one of his 63 years. Please, he said quietly. Please, just let me show you something first. Then you can call security. Against every instinct, Margaret nodded. Carlos pulled up his photo gallery, hands shaking. My nephew, Diego, he works in your IT department. 3 months ago, he started acting strange. New car. Expensive clothes. He wouldn't tell me where the money came from. Carlos's voice cracked. I raised that boy when his mother died. I know when he's lying. He showed her a photo, a young man Margaret vaguely recognized from the IT floor. 2 nights ago, I was cleaning the IT offices late. Diego forgot I was there. I heard him on the phone, talking about Riverside, your project. He was selling information, Miss Chen. To someone at NextGen Technologies. Margaret's blood ran cold. NextGen was their primary competitor. The company that had somehow known their every move for months. When I saw your note tonight, Carlos continued, I knew I had to tell someone. But Diego is family. I've been paralyzed, trying to decide what to do. This morning, I finally called the police. I gave them everything, the recordings I secretly made, the bank account information I found. They're meeting with your security team at 8 a.m. Margaret stared at this man, this janitor she'd never truly seen, who had just handed her the answer to the question that had been destroying her company. An answer he'd found by accident and reported despite it costing him the only family he had left. Why? She whispered. Diego is your nephew. You raised him. Why would you turn him in? Carlos met her eyes, and she saw a lifetime of integrity there. Because he's my nephew, Miss Chen. If I don't teach him that actions have consequences, who will? Better he learns now, while he's young enough to change. His voice strengthened. And because you employ 400 people in this building. Good people. People with families. What Diego was doing, it could cost them their jobs. How could I stay silent? Margaret's carefully constructed walls crumbled. She thought of the test she'd set up, the cynicism that had led her to suspect everyone, the isolation of leadership that had made her forget the basic goodness that still existed in the world. I'm sorry, she said, surprising herself. I'm sorry for not knowing your name before tonight. For not seeing you. Carlos smiled sadly. Most people don't see janitors, Miss Chen. We're used to it. Well, that changes today. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Diego was arrested, and the evidence Carlos provided was devastating. NextGen's CEO was implicated, clients returned, and TechVision's stock soared. The board meeting that would have fired Margaret instead gave her a standing ovation. But the biggest change happened in Margaret herself. She launched the TechVision Family Initiative, starting by interviewing every employee, including janitors, cafeteria workers, and security guards. She discovered stories, a security guard who was a published poet. A cafeteria worker who'd been an engineer in her home country. And Carlos, who'd been sending money home to build a school in his village in Mexico for 30 years. Margaret didn't fire Carlos for his nephew's crimes. Instead, she promoted him to director of facilities management, tripling his salary. The school in Mexico? TechVision funded its completion. And Diego? After serving his sentence, he'd have a job waiting, entry-level, supervised, but a second chance. At the dedication ceremony for the new position, Margaret told the entire company Carlos's story. She spoke about the night she'd pretended to sleep, about the test she'd set up, and about the man who'd passed a test he didn't even know he was taking. Carlos taught me that character isn't what you do when people are watching, she said, her voice thick